So there's this story. You might have heard it. Like most stories, it's about a person trying to figure out how to make the best life he can in his world. He's got one friend who thinks he's a genius philosopher, despite the fact that he's wrong about more or less everything all the time. He's got another friend who lives in constant misery, finding new depths of gloom in every new situation, and all the rest of his friends are just a collection of idiots that mostly things happen to. They go on these crazy adventures where horrible things happen to them all the time, just incredible danger. They constantly think each other have died only to be tearfully reunited later, and nobody ever seems to learn anything. Terrible things just keep happening to these people, and as much as this guy tries to organize his idiots into some kind of normalcy, their lives remain an unrelieved, unrelenting sequence of almost exclusively preventable catastrophes that this coterie of benighted ding-dongs just blithely accept as the resting state of a just world. And all he wants to do is garden. I refer, of course, to the eponymous character of Voltaire's 1759 masterpiece of satire, Candide, an incredibly dark and hilariously bawdy novel bearing the actual subtitle, Or Optimism.
What?
Sorry, pay no attention to the rabbit and the curlers. Okay, fine, let me get into costume. I admit that Rabbit and Candide might feel like strange characters to put side by side, but here in 2022 they both feel like I feel. People trying to make their way through a world of nonsensical misery, glaring gobsmacked at the people around them who somehow don't seem to realize the world is on fire. I've always felt like Rabbit was kind of the odd bun out in the 100 Acre Wood. If you look at almost any given scene in any given Pooh movie, if Rabbit is in it, he's probably somehow acting as a counterweight to the rest of the cast. If they're uncertain, he's the leader. If they're happy, he's grumpy. If they're worked up about something, he's the voice of reason. If they're chill, he's in a panic. As a kid, I always read Rabbit as just an absolute killjoy, a dead weight on the balloon of the group's mood. Eeyore is glum, but Eeyore's glumness is just a part of who he is. He never tries to bring the group down. But Rabbit is always trying to rope the others into seeing things his way. And the only thing he really seems to care about is his garden, way more than he seems to care about any of his friends. And again, as a kid, I kind of hated Rabbit for this. I always wondered just, why are you here? You don't like anybody, you're not happy. Why not just garden literally anywhere else? You own feet. As I've rewatched the Pooh canon with my kids, though, here in 2022, where we're tossed from apocalypse to apocalypse like turds in a wave pool, Rabbit has become a much more understandable and empathetic character. He doesn't want any of this. All he wants to do is cultivate his garden. And that's when it hit me. Oh, he's Candide. Even though Rabbit was created in the 1920s, and even though the last animated Pooh movie came out in 2011, Rabbit is living the hopeless, helpless life that we are all living here in 2022, and he's proof that Voltaire's classic excoriation of the idiocy of optimism was, in fact, too optimistic. To get there, though, we're going to have to spend some time with Candide, Voltaire, and how they attempted to deal with a different time the world went to shit. Candide, or A Series of Unfortunate Events for BDSM Pessimists. If you've never read Candide, I highly recommend it. It's really short, really funny, and phenomenally dark. Just, like, if there's anything for which a content warning might possibly be applied, assume it happens in this book, up to and including a woman getting a butt cheek cut off.
Hey, and eaten, right?
And eaten. But for us to understand Candide, I have to explain it to you in two ways. So I'll tell you a bit about what happens in the story, but what really draws the line between Rabbit and Candide is what Voltaire is doing with the book. I'll also pause to mention that because this book is written in French, I will hereafter pronounce every single name as incorrectly as possible. Apologies. But first, the story. Candide is a young nobleman of nearly but not quite immaculate lineage who lives with his uncle, a baron. He and his cousin Kunigunde are tutored by their brilliant teacher Dr. Pangloss, who instructs them in metaphysico-theological cosmolunology. More concretely, Pangloss teaches them repeatedly at length that they live in the best of all possible worlds, that logic dictates that God is good, and therefore, if there were a better possible world, then we'd be living in it. Ipso facto, besto worldo. When Kunigunde stumbles on Pangloss in flagrante delicto with a maid, the tutor unknowingly provides her with instruction in some matters not abstract, but rather extremely physical. And so, Kunigunde seeks out Candide to conduct a replication study. They bone, is what I'm saying. They are discovered, and Candide is summarily ejected from the walled garden of the Baron's palace. At which point, terrible things start happening. Candide is kidnapped and forced into service in the Bulgar army, beaten by a regiment of 2,000 soldiers for attempted desertion, pardoned, and sent into battle. He immediately hides among the dead, and a second attempt to desert succeeds, crawls through 2 ruined cities where maimed civilians beg for death, flees the country, gets a chamber pot dumped on his head, and reunites with the mutilated and dying Pangloss, who informs him that everyone he has ever known and loved has died miserably. We are on page 9. It's here that we learn that everybody else has somehow faced a chain of misfortunes at least as absurd as Candide's, and often worse. And this is essentially the story. Candide ends up traveling the world in search of people who are happy, and time again finds that any shimmer of happiness he thinks he sees is just a thin layer of frost atop a deep and poisoned well of misery. All the characters in Candide argue that they are the most wretched of all humans and nobody has suffered like they have, and I'll be damned if they're not every single one of them correct. Almost every character is at some point enslaved, almost every character loses a body part, almost every female character is the victim of some kind of sexual violence. Name a body part and someone has it cut off or cut out or cut in half.
Don't forget and eaten.
After 81 pages of Candide basically blundering around like Mr. Magoo in a Hieronymous Bosch painting, Candide and his pals, many of whom have died and come back more times than Kenny, find themselves settling into a life on a small farm and discovering at long last the quotidian wretchedness of everyday life. After a while, the boredom was so fierce that one of Candide's companions asks, "I should like to know which is worse, being raped 100 times by pirates, having a buttock cut off, running the gauntlet in the Bulgar army, being flogged and hanged in an auto-da-fe, being dissected and rowing in the galleys, experiencing, in a word, all the miseries through which we have passed, or else just sitting here and doing nothing?" It is a hard question, Candide says. And Pangloss, bless him, is still on his bullshit. Candide asks him, after all this, do you still think everything is for the best in this world? And Pangloss's response is that I am still of my first opinion, for after all, I am a philosopher, and it would not be right for me to recant, since Leibniz could not possibly be wrong. Which brings us to what Candide is doing. And what Candide is doing is just absolutely dunking on Leibniz. Candide, or what diss tracts looked like in the 18th century. To say that Candide is satire gives it a sort of academic legitimacy that kind of undercuts the reality of the book, which is that there was one guy, or rather one guy who was the figurehead of a school of thought, that Voltaire thought was so cheeseheadedly stupid that he just had to write a book about it. The guy was Leibniz, and the school of thought was rational optimism, the idea that we live in the best of all possible worlds. Gottfried Wilhelm von Leibniz was an Enlightenment philosopher who did a lot of stuff, like invent calculus and predict relativity, which I just don't care about. To make sense of Rabbit's role in the 100 Acre Wood, what we need to know is that Leibniz was the dumb chump who came up with the idea of optimism. Specifically, in his 1714 publication Monadology and elsewhere, Leibniz makes the argument that is the backbone of Pangloss's philosophy. God is good, so if the world could be better, it would be, therefore this is the best of all possible worlds. Which, just on the face of it, no, right? The world could be better if I had a ham sandwich right now, and I don't. Get owned, Leibniz. And what I've just done is effectively Candide. When I say Candide is a diss track, it's maybe easier to see looking at his 1756 poem on the Lisbon disaster, which really feels like nothing so much as an early 90s Beastie Boys track.
Leibniz can't tell me from what secret cause in a world governed by the wisest laws. Lasting disorders, woes that never end. With our vain pleasures, real sufferings blend. Why ill the virtuous with the vicious shares? Why neither good nor bad misfortune fares? I can't conceive that what is ought to be, and this each doctor knows as much as me.
Candide is Voltaire's reply to Leibniz, delivered in the philosophical equivalent of a one-line burn, an 81-page narrative comprising an unending chain of calamities. It is a book about falling down the stairs in a house that's on fire, built on an erupting volcano, and also your wife is divorcing you, you have syphilis, and you're being arrested for causing the volcano to erupt, and instead of a public defender, you get your fundamentalist neighbor, and her whole defense is that it's all God's plan. 85% of Voltaire's point is that everything is awful, and you're stupid if you think otherwise. And that was before they came up with Twitter, my god. But the endless series of hellish pratfalls that is Candide isn't just about the vicarious thrill of watching an old woman get her butt cheek cut off.
And eaten.
And eaten. It's an attempt to answer the question, what is the world? Because most of the horrors that exist in Candide come from real life. Candide is threaded through with then current events like the 7 Years' War, the Portuguese Inquisition, and the catastrophic Lisbon earthquake of 1755. Real nightmares that undermine the rational optimism of Leibniz and his adherents. Leibniz, through Pangloss, declares eternally that we live in the best of all possible worlds. And Voltaire's response is, No, Gottfried, the world is not essentially good. Are you fucking joking? We can't seem to stop killing each other, the church keeps setting people on fire, and Lisbon just fell down. Do you not own a window? We are in bad trouble. From start to finish, Pangloss vomits forth his message of blinkered optimism, even as his message rings more and more hollow to Candide and his companions, and in the end they decide simply to ignore him. They settle on their small farm, and as Pangloss opines about the moral imperative of industriousness as evident in the biblical creation narrative, one of his companions cuts him off, saying, "Let us work without philosophizing. It is the only way to make life bearable." As their labors improve their lives, Pangloss gives it one last shot, explaining that all the tragedies that have befallen them have led them here, to the fine little farm where they at last have found a meager peace. But Candide is done listening. "That is very well put," he replies, "but we must cultivate our garden." Candide is one of those novels that feels eternally now. In 1923, Aldous Huxley wrote that the world we live in is recognizably the world of Candide. In 1966, translator Robert M. Adams commented on how modern the book feels, describing it as a work of peculiar vitality. And in the 2020s, which seem to draw cataclysms as latrines draw flies, here I am seeing Candide in the 100 Acre Wood. To quote Adams again, Candide feels permanently timely because of the things it destroys and the way in which it carries out that work of destruction. And in truth, Candide is thorough and passionate in its project of destroying optimism. The world of Candide is only a slightly distorted version of the world of the Voltaire who wrote it, and it feels it could just as easily be 2022 with the serial numbers filed off. It destroys completely the idea that ours is the best of all possible worlds, but Candide's world is not quite so far gone as the 100 Acre Wood, or in fact the world in which we live today. Candide may destroy optimism, but it does not destroy hope. That, I think, is left to Rabbit. Rabbit, or Be the Change You Want to See in the Ass. If you've watched anything in the Winnie the Pooh cinematic universe at all, at least some of the parallels between the worlds and gardens of Candide and Rabbit should be obvious already. Both characters are set against castes that are much more interested in speculating than in taking action. Both stories are filled top to bottom with near-death encounters, up to and including some pretty dramatic fake-outs. Both feature characters who are as much personifications of emotional or philosophical ideas as they are people. I hope you'll excuse me then if I take these essential background similarities as given so that we can more meaningfully explore the connections between Candide and Rabbit and how those connections can help us figure out what to make of a world that has gone to shit. Because while Candide ends on the hope that by working locally we can improve our battered world, Rabbit maintains no such illusions. Candide's response to Pangloss, the last line and arguably the thesis of Candide, is where I really hear the voice of Rabbit speaking. We must cultivate our garden. And a simple, widely accepted read of that last line interprets it as something like this. Philosophy is all well and good, guys, but we must focus on doing the work in front of us. Do what you can in the place where you are. But before we get to that broader interpretation, let's linger for a moment with the literal. Because as Adam Gopnik phrases it in his essay Voltaire's Garden, a reader would be wrong, surely, in thinking that by cultivating one's garden, Voltaire meant anything save cultivating one's garden. Because Voltaire, like Candide and like Rabbit, believed in gardens. We know Voltaire as a philosopher and satirist, which might lead us to look on him as someone who felt most at ease in the world of abstractions, but this was not the case at all. As Helena Fader frames it, the life and lifestyle Voltaire built for himself was an experiment to engage fully with the materiality of human life through the meaningful practice of the daily activities of existence. She frames Voltaire's critiques of philosophical navel-gazing as not only materialist, but explicitly earth-centered. Candide's garden isn't just a metaphor, it's physical. On his various estates, Voltaire cultivated gardens that were closer to small farms than the pruned and preened artificial gardens common in France at the time. He wrote, "I have only done one sensible thing in my life, to cultivate the ground. He who clears a field renders a better service to humankind than all the scribblers in Europe." And who else but Rabbit is so wholly committed to cultivating his garden? No matter the circumstance or season, Rabbit is working his patch in one way or another. In the winter, he's got his last carrot wrapped up in a scarf and a hot water bottle. In spring, he clears out the winter's detritus on spring cleaning day. He wages a small, relentless war against some deeply unsettling bugs. Almost all Rabbit's plotlines involve his garden in one way or another. It's his defining characteristic. But Candide's imperative to cultivate our garden extends beyond the literal. As Gopnik also notes, the force of Candide's last great injunction is that our responsibility is local and concentrated on immediate action. In the face of an unfair and unjust world which we cannot control, all we can do is the immediate physical work in front of us. This, too, is Rabbit. The number of episodes and storylines where Rabbit tries to improve the life of someone in the crew is really staggering. Based on a highly technical assessment where I read the episode summaries on Wikipedia and made some tally marks, it looks like Rabbit is a central character in 22 episodes of The New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, and fully 15 of those focus on him putting in work to improve someone else's life. Now, admittedly, he typically does that by being a bossy Badinsky, which isn't anyone's favorite form of altruism. But nevertheless, almost 70% of Rabbit's storylines show him trying to help his friends become better versions of themselves. By comparison, across the 60 episodes where Rabbit is not a central character, only 11 feature another member of the Pooh crew attempting to help someone, so about 18%. Really, Rabbit is the only one who's ever concerned about getting anything done. Rabbit is the one who tries to get the gang prepared for a blizzard in the Tigger movie. When Piglet goes missing in Piglet's big movie, Rabbit is the one leading the hunt. When they're stuck in a hole in Winnie the Pooh, Rabbit's the one who's trying to get them out. When a boulder falls on Eeyore's house, Rabbit is the chief engineer and construction foreman for the elaborate contraption to get it off. By comparison, when Christopher Robin needs help cleaning his room, Tigger just tells him to shove everything under the bed. Helena Fader again. The most fascinating and paradoxical aspect of Candide is its successful refutation of metaphysical thought through an insistence on the inescapability of material reality. Consider then an inescapable moment from the classic Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. Pooh visits Rabbit in search of lunch. In this moment at least, Pooh is more the Lisbon earthquake than the Bulgar army. He's a force of nature descending inexorably and inevitably on Rabbit's pantry. Rabbit shares with his friend more than he'd intended, and when there is nothing left to consume, Pooh moves on. That is, he tries to. Here is Rabbit, caught in an inescapable moment of material reality. His back door is full of ass. The ass cannot be budged. It will not be pushed or pulled, squeezed or squashed, shoved or shoehorned. The ass remains. And so Rabbit, in his way, sets about cultivating his garden. He does the work that is in front of him. A frame, a splash of color, antlers, a face. Do you see? In the worldview of Candide, this is praxis. This is the material manifestation of Voltaire's rejection of Leibnizian metaphysics. Claudine Lost, among others, has described Candide as an abandoned theodicy, a philosophical project attempting to reconcile a just God and an unjust world. She writes, faced with the inability to come to a theoretical solution of the problem of evil, theodicy gives way to more specific questions, such as what basis humanity can have for action in a world which is one of uncertainty, folly, vice, and injustice. Rabbit's world is not the best of all possible worlds. It is instead a world where there is an ass in his living room. Rabbit, like Candide, does not know whether evil can be eradicated, but he assumes that things can certainly be improved, so the world can be a better place and existence can be, if not happy, at least tolerable. Both Candide and Rabbit want nothing more than to escape from the mad abstractions of the archetypes that surround them and just cultivate their garden. The difference between them, and what makes Rabbit's world feel so much bleaker and so much more 2022 than Candide's, is that as Candide sets out to cultivate his garden, all the members of the little community joined together in this praiseworthy plan. Everyone did something useful. Rabbit wants nothing more than that. But he doesn't get it.
Tigger! No! 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 What now? What is going on here? Take it me, will you?
Do you think a 10-year-old should choose to carry a baby?
I believe it would probably impact her life, and so therefore it would fall under any exception and would not be an abortion.
There is no exception for the life or the health of the mother in the Ohio law.
I have 5 grandchildren. I would do anything to protect my 5 grandchildren, including, as a last resort, shooting them.
If you hadn't had the vaccine, you ought to think about getting it, because if you're my age...
In my opinion, a lot of people voted for Brexit because they didn't want foreign workers coming over here taking our jobs. And now that's exactly the situation that we've got. We've got a lack of foreign workers, which is why we've got these shortages.
I'm assuming you didn't vote for Brexit.
I did, actually.
I'm so sick of fucking Donald Trump, man. God, I'm fucking sick of it.
Close enough. Oh,
a sudden it felt like they were just finding more ballots in every single direction, where we were not ready for what they were willing to do.
When do we get to use the guns? I mean, literally, where's the line? How many elections are they going to steal before we kill these people?
So, no.
Shoo, go away, Crow.
Voter fraud's a real problem in the country.
Yeah, I know all about it.
Have you ever seen any voter fraud?
Yeah, me, I did it.
You committed voter fraud? What'd you do?
Voted twice for Trump.
Really?
Garden! It's gone! Why do you always ruin my garden?
Rabbit, or Sisyphus. I'm typing these words on a laptop that is slowly but steadily dying. A month ago I ordered a new one, but it won't be here for another month at least, because the workers that will produce it are still on lockdown. I'm writing this having just heard that Roe v. Wade was overturned, meaning that literally millions of people will be legally prohibited from getting the healthcare they need, despite the fact that the staggering majority of the people of this country believe that they should have it. One of the people who made this decision has made it clear that the court is coming for birth control and gay rights next. A month ago today, 19 kids were shot and killed in their classroom while the people who were supposed to protect them literally stood outside and did nothing. Excuse me, I tell a lie. They actively prevented people from going in to help. The Democratic Party in the US, which is presented to those of us on the left as the only real political option, has done, is doing, and continues to do nothing to address any of these cataclysms. I feel like Candide, but more than that, I feel like Rabbit. I try to do the work in front of me, but more and more it feels impossible. I write this halfway watching a Twitch stream and drinking a rage milkshake that I definitely don't need. I have student work I should be grading. How do you do anything? How are any of us supposed to do anything? I don't have an answer. Here's what I'm going to tell myself right now. I'm going to watch this stream, I'm going to drink this milkshake, and then I'm going to give as much of myself as I can to my students, because this is praxis. Rabbit cannot fix the world, but he doesn't stop trying. He doesn't stop trying to badger his friends into being better versions of themselves. He doesn't stop preparing for winter, and he doesn't abandon his idiot fucking friends when they are playing dress up in the middle of a blizzard. Probably the most spectacular destruction of Rabbit's garden happens in Rabbit Takes a Holiday. Rabbit's garden is finally just how he wants it to be, so he takes a vacation. The crew decide to take care of his garden for him while he's gone, and by the time they're done helping, Rabbit's house and garden are reduced to a sort of chaos bog. When Rabbit gets back to find his home and his work absolutely obliterated, the gang is expecting him to be apoplectic, but he's not.
I'm not mad. I'm overjoyed.
Overjoyed?
Why, look at all the work there is to do.
Rabbit knows that there is no hope. He knows that he cannot plant anything that Pooh and Piglet can't bumble through, that Tigger can't uproot, or that Gopher can't undermine. The people he shares his community with will at best harm where they try to help, and more often they will simply destroy through inconsiderateness or malice. Nevertheless, Rabbit cultivates his garden. It doesn't work, but he never stops trying. So why? Why does he do it? The answer, I think, isn't hope. He knows what his life is, and he knows that the people around him will ruin his life, little by little, day by day, over and over. The answer isn't hope. The answer is this.
Rabbit's story. The Lazy Friends. Once there was an industrious rabbit who lived amongst a bunch of loafers. All summer they played and slept and ate all of the rabbit's honey, while he toiled day after day in his garden. When winter came, the rabbit had a nicely stocked larder. But his friends had nothing, since they'd done nothing to prepare for the winter.
Woe are we,
they cried.
We're so hungry. If only we were more like you. We've learned our lesson.
Now the rabbit was hard-working and kind, so he took pity on them and shared. And after that, everyone worked as hard as he did. The end.
As he is deciding at last how to face his bleak and vicious world, Candide encounters a Turk whose farm is a little utopia. Candide asks the man about his small domain of bliss, and the Turk responds, "Work keeps away 3 great evils: boredom, vice, and need." Rabbit works because they need him. He works as Candide did, without philosophizing, for it is the only way to make life bearable. He works against boredom, vice, and above all, need. He works to care for those around him, even when they will not care for themselves. Should I be more precise? Should I be more explicit? Gopher is the Trump Republican upset that their Mexicans were deported. Piglet is the anti-abortion advocate shocked to find that his policy platform might affect a 10-year-old victim of rape. Owl is the Brexiteer screaming, "This is not the Brexit I voted for." Pooh is the lifelong Democrat who keeps telling us that the solution is to vote for the same hand-wringing octogenarian centrists who will continue to do nothing but fundraise on human suffering. The 100 Acre Wood is the leopards ate my face party writ even more cartoonish. But the wrong-headed choices that our community is constantly making does not obviate our responsibility to care for each other. It does not obviate our need to help them see sense. It does not obviate our obligation to work without ceasing to create a world where all our needs are met, sustainably and justly. Listen to Rabbit. To work for each other does not require hope. It requires only that we care for each other. It requires only that we cultivate our garden.
I'm at a family wedding and the Queen died, so I don't know what's gonna fucking happen on Monday, but buckaroo.
Hey, Dad knew. And eaten, right? It gets eaten too, right? And eaten, right? And it gets eaten too, right? And eaten. And eaten. And eaten. Don't forget and eaten. 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 And eaten too, right?